Have you ever found yourself chasing after love, only to feel more hollow than before? We tell ourselves we want connection, intimacy, someone to see us and understand. But what if what we're actually addicted to isn't love at all? What if it's validation, fleeting, fragile, and utterly consuming? This is not a love story. It's a mirror. In the beginning, it feels like magic. They text you back instantly. Their compliments feel like warm sunlight after a long winter. Every glance, every word they say makes you feel chosen. Your chest tightens with the thrill of being wanted. Finally, someone sees you. Finally, you matter. But soon, the dynamic shifts. You notice yourself checking your phone more often, waiting just a little too long for a response. You dress a certain way, say certain things, just to keep their interest. The anxiety that creeps in isn't about losing love, it's about losing the spotlight. And that spotlight, it's addictive. You don't realize you're hooked until it's too late. You're not in a relationship. You're performing in an emotional theater where applause equals affection. This is what Carl Jung might call a projection of the inner void. It's not love we're starving for. It's reassurance that we exist, that we are enough. When we haven't built a solid sense of self, we lean on others like crutches, not companions. Think back to childhood. Maybe you were praised only when you achieved, smiled only when you pleased. You learned early. Love is earned, not given. So now, as an adult, love isn't something you fall into. It's something you chase like a prize, constantly proving yourself worthy. And when you don't get the reaction you crave, panic sets in. Did I say something wrong? Should I pull back? Maybe if I just do a little more, they'll come back. You're not falling in love. You're falling into patterns. This is the hidden truth behind many modern relationships. They're not built on connection, but on performance. We aren't seeking partners. We're auditioning for approval. And when the applause stops, we collapse, confused why it all hurts so badly. But what if this pain is trying to show us something deeper? We think we need another person to complete us. But Jung would argue, it's the integration of our shadow, our unloved parts, that leads to wholeness. Until we confront the wounds we carry, the abandonment, the rejection, the childhood ache of not being enough, we'll keep reenacting the same play with different actors. The problem isn't that people don't love you. The problem is you don't believe it unless it's constantly proven. And no one can carry that burden forever. You need love like you need air. But the kind you've been chasing is like smoke. It disappears the moment you try to hold it. Validation isn't nourishment, it's sugar water. It spikes your self-worth for a moment, only to leave you crashing, empty and desperate for another hit. And the cruelest twist, the more validation you need, the less lovable you feel. You start to believe that you're only worthy when performing, that the real you, the messy, scared, needy you, must stay hidden. But that's the version of you that's most desperate to be loved. So, you become what they want. Quiet when you're angry, sweet when you're tired, sexy when you're hurting. You trade authenticity for approval, and it works for a while. But each compromise chips away at your soul until you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's staring back. This is not love. It's self-abandonment dressed as romance. The real tragedy, most people never notice. They blame the other person. They stopped loving me. They changed. But what actually changed was your ability to keep up the performance. Love that's conditional will always be exhausting, because you're not just loving them, you're fighting for your right to exist in their world. So here's the question. What if you stopped performing? What if you let someone see the real you, without the filters, without the mask? You fear they'll leave. But the truth is, anyone who only stays for the mask was never truly with you to begin with. Love doesn't mean constant validation. Love is not a 24/7 applause machine. Love, real love, is quiet. It's the person who sits with you in silence, not needing you to sparkle. It's the one who stays when you're not performing, who chooses you when you're raw, anxious, and utterly human. But to experience that kind of love, you must be willing to face the parts of yourself that beg for validation. You must sit with the discomfort of not being praised. You must learn to exist without a spotlight. That's not loneliness, that's liberation. Because the moment you stop chasing validation, you start building value. And from that place, true love becomes possible. Not the kind that burns bright and fast, but the kind that stays. You think you're falling in love, but really, you're falling into need. You crave the high of being chosen, admired, worshipped even. But deep inside, there's a trembling question echoing in every silent moment. Am I enough when I'm not performing? It starts subtly. You notice how your heart skips when they compliment you, not for who you are, but for what you give. You start shaping yourself around their desires, like clay, molded by fleeting hands. At first, it feels like love, but over time, it feels like disappearing. And you don't just disappear to others, you vanish from yourself. You begin editing your words, mid-sentence, swallowing thoughts that feel too heavy, too much. You say yes when you mean no, laugh when you're hurting, stay silent when your soul is screaming. You shrink, just to fit the mold of who you think they'll love. But that shrinking has a cost. Carl Jung once warned us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet many of us abandon that privilege in the name of acceptance. We trade authenticity for approval, self-respect for momentary affection. It's a slow erosion of identity disguised as romance. Eventually, you no longer know if you're in love, or just afraid to be alone. You tell yourself this is what connection looks like: compromise, sacrifice. But there's a difference between adjusting and erasing, between choosing peace and choosing silence. Love shouldn't cost your voice. You may stay in these dynamics for months, sometimes years, clinging to the illusion that if you just work harder, love will stay. You blame yourself for every distance, apologize for your needs, overfunction to keep their attention. You confuse effort with worth. And every time they pull away, it activates your survival brain. You chase, you fix, you perform harder. You're not reacting from love.
If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.
You're reacting from abandonment trauma. The truth? You're not looking for a partner. You're looking for a savior. Someone to heal the wounds left by parents who withheld warmth, by friends who disappeared, by lovers who made affection feel like a currency you had to earn. So you enter relationships like war zones, armored in charm and people-pleasing, terrified of being seen as too much. You crave safety, but chase it through unstable doors. Even the calm moments start to feel like walking on ice. Will they approve of this version of me? Should I hide that opinion? What if my sadness is too inconvenient? So you learn to be palatable, digestible, a sanitized version of your humanity. But here's the secret no one tells you. The more you abandon yourself, the less lovable you feel. And the more you chase love to fill that void, the more it slips through your fingers. You begin to resent them, not because they're cruel, but because you made yourself small for someone who never asked you to grow. And resentment, over time, turns love sour. You start keeping score. You silently seethe over your unacknowledged sacrifices. You want them to guess your wounds, validate your silence, read your mind, but they can't, and they won't, because love cannot replace self-connection, and no amount of attention can substitute for self-trust. It's not their job to make you feel worthy. That job was always yours. The moment you start confusing love with emotional oxygen, every slight becomes suffocating. Every disagreement becomes a rejection. Every delay in reply, a declaration of war. You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to your oldest ghosts. The child in you still begging to be held, still asking, am I good enough if I stop trying so hard? That's where the healing begins, not by chasing another partner, but by turning inward, by asking yourself, what part of me believes I have to perform for love? And then gently, slowly, choosing not to. You might be afraid that your real self isn't lovable, that if you drop the mask, they'll walk away. Let them. Let the ones who only love the show leave when the curtain falls. Because the right people won't applaud your performance. They'll love your presence. They'll sit with the mess, the quiet, the uncertainty. They'll love the part of you that doesn't sparkle, the part that aches, the part that doesn't have it all figured out. And when you meet someone like that, when you've finally stopped hiding, you'll realize you were never too much. You were just never in the right room. Love doesn't demand your erasure. It demands your embodiment. And the journey back to yourself, that's the most sacred love story of all. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you realize you're exhausted, not from loving, but from trying to be loved. You've bent in every direction, twisted yourself into someone more agreeable, more desirable, more worthy, and yet, it's never enough. This isn't love. It's emotional labor disguised as intimacy. You smile on cue. You nod when you want to speak. You become fluent in their moods, needs, rhythms, while your own go ignored like unopened letters. You've become a caretaker of their comfort, even as your own soul begins to fray. This is the shadow of love Carl Jung warned us about. He wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because to do that, you'd have to stop managing perceptions. You'd have to let people see your fears, your flaws, your rawness. But when you've grown up feeling unsafe in your truth, performing feels like protection. And here's where it turns dangerous. When you conflate survival with connection. You stay in relationships where your needs are unmet because you fear losing what little affection you get. You tell yourself that crumbs are a feast, that silence is peace, that emotional distance is just how they are. You rationalize red flags until you're colorblind. It's not because you're weak. It's because you were taught to earn love, not receive it freely. You've been conditioned to believe that your worth lies in your usefulness, that to be loved, you must fix, please, soften. So you become the peacekeeper, the therapist, the mind reader. You apologize when you're hurt. You forgive before an apology ever arrives. But deep down, you're angry, not at them, at yourself. For making yourself so digestible you can't taste your own truth anymore. For pouring so much into others that you forgot you had a cup too. For believing that love meant losing yourself. This is the heartbreak of the helper. You think if you love enough, they'll change. If you're patient, they'll soften. If you just hold on longer, things will go back to the way they were. But that's not love. That's bargaining with your own abandonment wounds. Love doesn't demand that you suffer silently. So many of us confuse emotional endurance with loyalty. We think staying quiet when we're hurting makes us strong. But strength isn't silence. Strength is speaking your needs and being willing to walk away when they're unmet. Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's martyrdom. And you weren't born to bleed for someone else's growth. At some point, you'll have to confront this truth. They don't need to change for you to choose yourself. You don't need a reason to leave beyond your own exhaustion. Your pain is valid, even if no one else sees it. Your longing is sacred, even if it's inconvenient to them. You're allowed to want more presence, more safety, more mutuality. You're allowed to say, this isn't enough, without guilt. That's not selfish, that's self-respect. And when you begin to honor your emotional needs instead of downplaying them, something shifts. You start to feel the ache of all the times you silenced yourself, the weight of all the roles you played, the grief of all the years you spent waiting to be chosen. But that grief is a sign you're waking up to the reality that love shouldn't cost your dignity, that your softness isn't a flaw, that you don't have to twist into someone smaller just to keep someone else comfortable. You can choose peace without performing. You can choose solitude without shame. And most of all, you can choose yourself, not as a last resort, but as a sacred beginning. That's when everything changes. When you stop chasing those who don't see you and start tending to the parts of you that were never given a voice. When you become your own safe place, your own witness, your own advocate. That's not loneliness, that's liberation. Because real love, the kind that nourishes, expands, and grounds you, doesn't start with finding the right person. It starts with finally coming home to yourself. At some point, you stop asking, why didn't they love me? And begin asking, why did I stay where I wasn't loved? That's where real healing begins, not in unraveling their behavior, but in understanding your own silence. We often talk about toxic people, but rarely do we talk about how we trained ourselves to tolerate them, the way we ignored our gut, the way we rationalized their indifference, the way we kept showing up for people who kept proving they didn't care. That's the hidden cost of emotional neglect. You learn to betray yourself just to maintain a connection. You think, if I just stay calm, they won't leave. If I don't bring it up, they won't get angry. If I love them enough, they'll finally see me. But they don't. Because they're not listening. Because your presence isn't their privilege. It's their expectation. And slowly, your voice becomes background noise. even to yourself. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And that includes us. We avoid ourselves by chasing unavailable people. We numb with overfunctioning. We distract ourselves with caretaking. We busy ourselves with proving we're lovable, never realizing we were already enough. Healing isn't about becoming better for them. It's about becoming whole for yourself. That's the pivot. You stop trying to fix what's broken in others and start mending the parts of you that accepted crumbs as a feast. You return to the root, the moments you first learned that love had to be earned. The childhood rooms where your feelings were too much. The teenage years where rejection felt like proof you were unworthy. And when you sit with those wounded parts, not to judge them, but to understand them, something cracks open. Compassion enters. You stop seeing your past self as foolish and start seeing them as brave. Brave for trying to survive in a world that never taught them how to stay whole while loving others. Brave for staying soft when it would have been easier to harden. Brave for believing, against all odds, that love was still worth seeking. That's when the pattern breaks. Because once you learn how to validate yourself, you stop begging others to do it for you. You stop shrinking in the presence of anger. You stop people-pleasing as a survival tactic. And you start to notice the red flags you used to romanticize. You walk away, not as a punishment to them, but as a promise to yourself. You no longer need to be chosen by those who can't even choose themselves. You no longer crave apologies from people who lack self-awareness. You no longer mistake tension for chemistry. You no longer equate chaos with passion. You finally see the love you've been searching for wasn't in their eyes. It was in the mirror. But this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new one. A story where you stop waiting to be loved right and start loving right now. A story where your boundaries aren't a wall, but a doorway to deeper connection. A story where you don't have to abandon yourself just to feel less alone. It won't be perfect. Some days, you'll still miss them. Some nights, you'll still feel the ache. Healing doesn't erase memory. It rewires meaning. You'll remember the nights you stayed up crying, but you'll also remember how you got up the next morning and made coffee anyway. You'll remember the silence that used to scare you, and how one day it started to feel like peace. And eventually, you'll outgrow the version of you who believed love was pain. You'll see how far you've come, not in distance, but in depth. In the way you speak to yourself now, in the way you don't chase after ghosts, in the way you pause and ask, what do I need? Instead of, what do they want? That's growth. That's healing. That's the quiet revolution of a person who has finally remembered their worth. So if you're here, standing at the edge of a life you once built around someone else, don't be afraid to walk away. Don't be afraid of the space it creates. Don't be afraid of the loneliness that comes before the fullness. Because on the other side of loss is something softer, wiser, and infinitely more real. You, the you that doesn't need to perform. The you that holds your own heart gently. The you that knows love isn't about proving you're enough. It's about remembering that you always were. And that is where your real life begins.